So, a little reminder on me. My name is Nick. I'm a coach, wellness consultant, specialist in behavior, identity, confidence change, all of these things. And hopefully, my fusion of information will be helpful for you today. Here's a quick overview of what we've covered so far. If this Inspire Her series is new to you, we've covered three sessions so far. First one being building a business around your strengths, unlocking creativity was our second, and last week's, which was the practicality of business planning and money. So this is our final session in this series. It's gone so quickly. But I would encourage you, if you have missed any of the sessions, the recordings are available and the guys can give you the links for that. A final little reminder, if you have attended all the sessions or you're requesting recordings for all four, then you can also apply for the one-to-one private coaching with me. Now, spaces are limited, but there's going to be information coming out on that tomorrow. So you can fill in your little application form and send that off as well. So let's get started on this week's content. We have a lot to get through today. And this week we are going to talk about overcoming obstacles. So I want to focus on four areas in particular that I thought would be relevant. First one being self-efficacy theory, second being the cognitive model. Third, I want to talk about some common obstacles. And the fourth one, regulation and a personal strategy so that you can leave these calls with a clear idea and vision of where you're going. So let's jump in. I can see lots of you introducing yourself and sharing your businesses. So please feel free to keep doing that as we go along. So, I wanted to start with self-efficacy theory because I think this is really relevant here for today's topic. So, it's a concept that was introduced, I think I mentioned it briefly on one of the other calls by a psychologist called Albert Bandura. Now, this refers to your belief in your ability to succeed. Now, this is interesting because it's not your ability itself, it's your belief in your ability to succeed, which is different. So think about it like a confidence in your personal ability to make this happen for yourself. So it's very different to things like, confidence or self-esteem. Self-esteem being more about overall self-worth. For example, this is very particular because it focuses on a capability or a task or a project. In this case, launching or running your successful business. So my logic for bringing this in here into the session is really simple. If you believe you can do this, if you believe that you can build a business that works for your goals, then your obstacles are going to become speed bumps. So they might be, frustrating at times, they might be annoying, they may force you to slow down occasionally, but ultimately they are not going to stop you because your belief in your own capability and your own desire to achieve your goals, whatever they look like for you, is too strong. So what I want to do, which I like to do at the start of these sessions, is get a little read on where we are as a group today. Now, bear in mind this changes all of the time, and that's okay. But today, where you're at, your question is this: thinking about your next step or your business, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in believing in your ability? Now, this is very specific, believing in your ability to move forward and figure this out. Now, 1 is very low, 10 is very high. Oh, this is good. You guys are definitely above average. Oh, there was someone at 3 to 4. We see you. A little 2 in there. Oh, I love it. There's a few tens in there. So it's a real mixture, you can see. Oh, wow. On good days, 8, on bad days, 3. Yeah, that's a good point, Eman, to note that it will fluctuate, but a general sense of where you're at. If you try to think about, most of the time, where am I hanging out? Georgina, 10. I love it. Brilliant. 4 at the moment, but I vary. Yeah. Oh, this is so lovely. It's so great. I really think that it's great for you to see where you all are together. Brilliant. That gives us a good idea. So thank you for sharing. So as you see, it's a real mixture. We're all at different little kind of checkpoints, if you like, but that's all okay. And the good thing about this is we can work on it. So let's be super clear here that one of the biggest things that can hold you back isn't your ability itself, it's your belief in your ability. So let's think about this belief. So, according to this theory that we're talking about, this belief is built from four main places. So, I want to talk you through this and then we're going to make it personal. So, first one is mastery experiences. So, this is I've done this before, I can do it again. And this is the biggest one. If you're going to, focus on any of these first, put a little star beside this one. This is, think about it like evidence from your own life. Every time you try something, every time you follow through, every time you solve a problem or get through something that you perceive to be difficult, you're building proof. So usually we're very quick to dismiss our wins and we don't like to big ourselves up generally. So part of overcoming obstacles is actually an ability to recognize what you've already done, knowing that this is building this skill of mastery. So I want you to really think about times where you have overcame problems and now you're out the other side and you're like, oh, which, a lot of us were talking about tech recently. Maybe that was one of the things that you overcame. You're like, oh, I thought I couldn't set up my website and now it's done. What's next? So take a little note if anything comes up for you, maybe little areas of personal mastery, things that are evidence that you have done this before. So, second one is vicarious experiences. Now, this is really important because this is if she can do it, maybe I can too. Elizabeth, I see your comment and I just want to call that out because it says, I'm low and I feel this session is really valuable for me. Also feeling imposter syndrome. So, Elizabeth, this one in particular is good for you because these vicarious experiences, if she can do it, maybe I can too. And this is where, other people matter, other people are really important. Seeing someone like you do something similar expands your sense of what feels possible. So, watching someone else complete something difficult, whether that's run a 5K, a marathon, or start a business, it gives you a little bit of a mental blueprint, and that does stick. So, what's really important here is how you mentally interpret what you're seeing. This really matters a lot. And, I hope these sessions are expanding this sense for you all, seeing each other and sharing all your scores and, being really supportive of each other because being in spaces like this matters, not because of the space itself, but because suddenly you're not the only one trying. There's other people here too. So ask yourself, do you need to find some more people in a similar kind of circumstance like you? And remember, we do have that networking space, so please join in there if you like. But think about the people in your life. Are you set up to have supportive people around you? Which links on to this number three, social persuasion. Now, this is the idea that someone believes in me, someone's encouraging me, because what people say to us really matters. Now, I also want you to be maybe a little bit clearer with the people around you. Sometimes you have to really spell it out. I need your support and encouragement. Because someone saying to you, you can do this, I believe in you, it shapes your belief system. But the thing to be wary of here, or just to be aware of in general, is it has to be genuine. Someone could say that just because you've asked them to, but if it's not genuine, it doesn't really connect. So it has to be a genuine kind of recognition of real progress, of your strengths, of what they see. And this is far more powerful. Now, equally, criticism or a kind of lack of support can also have an impact. So think about it like I'm going to become more intentional about whose voices I listen to. And of course, how you speak to yourself as well is really important. So the fourth one here is your emotional state. So this is how you're feeling and how you're feeling, how that's affecting what you think you can handle. So this one is really huge and often overlooked. And I'm going to talk a little bit in more detail about emotion because it's one of my favorite topics and huge anyway. But in this context, if you feel anxious, overwhelmed, stressed, um, your brain really can't interpret, it can interpret that, sorry, as I'm not capable. Whereas, if you feel calm, if you feel grounded, if you feel energized, things feel a little bit more actionable. They feel like you can take it on a little bit more. So, overcoming obstacles isn't just always about the strategy, it's also about managing your state. Now, this becomes part of your personal strategy, which we're going to talk about at the end. But I want to make this personal for you. So I want you to think about this for yourselves now, because I want you to be able to identify any of these areas, these four areas specifically, that might need some focus or attention. So, first question, what evidence do I already have that I can handle challenges? What evidence do I already have that I can handle challenges? And I feel free to take some notes here. I want to give you a little bit of time to really process because sometimes I'm aware we're flying through all of the content, but sometimes you need that little bit of time to think, but how does this impact me? What does this mean for me? Now, bear in mind this personal mastery, this experience, this is a really, really powerful one. So, it's worth spending a little bit of time on this, even if you write the question down, come back to it later. There was something similar to this. I can't remember who the author was. It might be Vex King, who talked about in his book the idea of a reverse bucket list. I think I might have mentioned it on one of the sessions before, where you write down all of the things, the really great things that you've achieved so far. Now, this can be personal or related to your business, but in general, it gives you a sense of, oh, maybe I have done more, experienced more, mastered more than I actually am giving myself credit for. So that's something that you could look at as well. All of the things that you've done over your life that you think, wow, that was pretty cool. So, number two, I want you to ask yourself who around you expands what you believe is possible. Now, this is your vicarious experiences. A lot of the time, I see that this is probably one that people can work on because sometimes, when you're working on something, you're trying to build something on your own, it can be difficult. So, just take a little note if that's something that you need to give some focus or attention to. And remember, none of these are, bad things. Don't beat yourself up about this. Just say, yep, that's something I need to work on. That's what I'm going to do. I'll just give you a little minute. So, number three, really important, the social persuasion aspect. What voices am I listening to? Now, this is important, the second part, maybe just as much as the first. Are they helping me? What voices am I listening to and are they helping me? Now you can include in this if you want to how you're speaking to yourself, that internal narrative and that story, and we are going to talk about that next. Julie, listening to the wrong ones. This is perfect timing to know, let's talk about it, let's bring it out into the open, and then we can work on adjusting that a little bit. Maureen, why is it difficult to get rid of those negative people or comments? I think, Maureen, do you know what? It can actually be really easy once you decide, I am not going to let that in anymore. There's an interesting experiment. I can't remember the name of it now. It might be angry faces, where, there's lots of faces, just little kind of, little circles in a big picture. And it's been proven that we can all pick out the negative face first, even though it might be one in a big sea of happy faces, because we're kind of programmed in that way with the negative bias to look out for anything that's a threat. So more emotionally, the negative comments will stand out more than the positive ones. So we have to know that and kind of counteract the system a little bit. So the fourth question, how am I managing my emotional state day to day? So, Amy, I'm going to use you as an example here because I can just see a little emotional comment. I need to set up a website, but I'm really scared. So, thinking about scared being that emotional state, it's going to be really hard to move forward if you feel scared because that's something that we're going to talk about. Your system reacts to it, your nervous system is going to react, and your whole psychological, biological profile is going, warning lights are going off. Don't do that. That's too scary. And Amy, I totally get it. I have a fear of messing it up, but you have to start somewhere. I always tell people with websites in particular, just get a page up, just get something up to break that kind of barrier of, putting yourself out there. Remember, it's just a matter of getting something up, and then you can always work on it over time. So now I want to kind of move on to another area which has a huge impact on your ability to overcome obstacles that are coming your way, which are your own thoughts. Now, the thoughts that you have can be your greatest asset, but also your greatest barrier. You have within you the potential for both. So the relationship that you have with your thoughts is the one that you have to look at and then think about it like it's an ongoing adjustment. You have to tweak it forever, I think, because this is almost like a scientific process of like tweaking, adjusting, fine-tuning, because you do have the power to change how you think. It's just that most people don't know how or where to start with this whole process. So, in this topic we're talking about today, it's really important because if you think you can overcome any obstacle, then it's possible. And if you don't, then obviously it becomes a lot harder. So think of it like a kind of mental training. And we're going to come back to this again shortly. But first, I also want to kind of spotlight or highlight the power of emotions. And then we're going to talk about both together. So all human behavior is driven by how we're feeling. We're, very emotional beings. So think about it like everything you do is largely being driven most of the time subconsciously by your emotional state. So knowing how you respond and your personal kind of emotional profile, if you like, is a good place to start. Now I'm going to tell you how we can do this. But think of it when you notice what's going on, you can choose how to react or choose how to change something if you feel like you want to or need to, of course. So, considering both of these things, let's make this a little bit more personal again. And I want you to think about your typical response. So, when something happens that you weren't expecting, maybe something's a challenge for you or you've had to overcome something, what is your typical response? So, I want you, first of all, maybe to consider your thought patterns. What comes into your mind? So I'm going to give you my personal one that comes into my mind here as an example. So if something happens or something, goes off script or off the radar or something pops up, something that often pops into my head is I should have known better. Now it just pops in and I'm like, oh, there that is again. So now because I know this crops up quite often for me, I choose not to waste any more time on it. That has not always been the case, but this is now. So what I do is I notice it, I go, oh, there's that thought again. Dismiss it and focus on another more kind of empowering thought, something like, you know, you did the best you could with what you knew, or what can you learn from this for next time? Or maybe what would you like to change from that? So take a wee minute, write down anything that comes to mind for you. What is that kind of first thought response or pattern? You can share them in the chat, obviously, as well. Oh, there's loads. Haley, I'm not good enough. And what if you were? That is something that definitely can be reframed. And maybe for you, Haley, on that one, it's a fear of success as well, because we talked about that briefly last week. What if I'm not good enough? What if I am? What if I am good enough? How will life change? Your subconscious is great at playing tricks on you, so you have to test that one out too. So I want you to think about your emotions next. So how do you feel when you are challenged or, an obstacle comes your way? So common things are, you might feel insecure, you might feel uncertain, your confidence may take a little knock. Yeah, Elizabeth, I'm not as good as, another person. Monica, I swear a lot, then move on or try to. And sometimes, you know what, that can just be an expression. What is that trying to tell you? A lot of the time it can be frustration, but that's okay. Denise, I'll do it later. Yeah, that's common. Later always feels like my enemy. Yeah, because you get frustrated with yourself that you're not doing it. Yeah, I get it. Freeze, Tina, is a very normal response. Yeah, yeah. So this kind of self-reflection is how you start to build a picture of how you react in certain circumstances. So this is, the thought of there's definitely emotional profiles you can go into a lot more depth on and, cognitive processes. But if you think about it like an overall picture for now, how do I react when something gets thrown at me? Then the biggest thing for you to consider right away is do I need to choose to change anything? Because some of you, may have perfectly good responses that you're happy with. But I want you to really challenge yourself to say, how could I react differently? Now, this is really closely connected to the cognitive model, which we're going to talk about next, because I think I've mentioned this again briefly in another call, but I wanted to come back to it because, in my mind, there's very few things that are more powerful than this. Once you kind of get the hang of looking at this as often, every day if you want to. It's just a little tool that you keep in your mind and it grows your sense of self-awareness over time. So this model in psychology, we call this the cognitive model. Sometimes I call it the 24/7 cycle because this is what's going on for all of us 24/7. It's just that most people aren't aware of it in this way. So let's take the situation at the top. So something triggers a problem or a situation. So let's work through a life example here. So someone asked you if your website is finished yet. That's the trigger. Your thought is, or could be, oh my God, they think I'm not professional. I really should have my website finished by now. Why am I so slow? Why am I not able to do this? How does everyone else find this easier than me? Maybe I'm not cut out for this after all. And it sometimes can be a cascade of different supportive thoughts. Now, what happens when all of these things are going through your mind, it leads onto your feelings and your emotions and feeds that sense of, perhaps low mood, insecurity. You don't feel good enough, like a few of you mentioned. Sometimes sadness, sometimes you can be upset, sometimes you can be frustrated and angry with yourself. Then this leads on to the behavior, which could be avoidance, which a few of you also mentioned. It could be a withdrawal, you don't want to talk about it. You're just taking yourself away from the situation. Could also be procrastination or self-sabotage in some way. Sometimes it can also look like a little bit of self-punishment, which looks like things like overeating, for example, because ultimately in that behavior stage, you're doing something to make yourself feel better. So what you're trying to do is avoid the feeling. That's really important. The behavior is something that you somewhere along the way have learned that this helps me short term, not long term, of course. So also your bodily sensations, you might, feel a little bit heavy in your chest. You might have a sinking feeling in your stomach. You might have a lump in your throat. You might have a kind of spinning around in your head sensation. But the really important thing here is the result is there's no progress. The situation remains the same. You don't reach out to anyone about your website. You don't get anywhere, like Amy was saying, and you keep yourself stuck. Now, this example can easily become a really negative cognitive loop, but this is not your personality. This is not who you are. This is just a cognitive loop. So you have to kind of see it for what it is, lift it outside of yourself. What I encourage people to do with this, I will send over the sheet to Sally and we'll put that as an additional worksheet so that you can print this out and maybe write some notes on it as well, because it's really useful to say, okay, what was that trigger? Write it down on this sheet. What was I thinking? How did I feel? What did I do? How did I feel in my body? Now, how can I change this? Because the whole point of looking at this cognitive model is to reassure you, I guess, that it can be rewired. This is what neuroplasticity is, but it can't be changed if you don't know this is what's happening in the first place. So think about it like, like it says here, this is why you're doing what you're doing all the time. 24/7, this is just happening all the time. I think about it like a program that runs in the background. It's just sometimes that you're not tuned into it. So a good example that I use for this is, tell me an example of a time where you look back on now and you say, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Personal or work, doesn't matter. What was I thinking? And you can use it as a little example to write out what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what you did, how you felt in your body. Because the whole idea is you can disassociate from the event or the problem to see yourself as separate so that you can look in and take different action. Hopefully, this makes sense so far. So, Jennifer, what bit do we try to change? So, think about it like an awareness tool first. You just want to see what's going on. You just want to see what's happening. So, don't try to, fix everything at once if you like. Try to think about it like, okay, I'm going to see exactly what's going on. So, using Amy's example of her website. So, if I was to say to Amy, is your website finished? Then Amy would work through this model. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what your behaviors are. Tell me how you feel in your body and use it as an actual exercise to say, okay, what can I choose to change? Which could be a more empowering thought of, I have more capability to build a website than I'm giving myself credit for. So you're trying to switch the the negative look to a more positive one, but it does take a little bit of practice. You're not going to be good at this right away. What I also sometimes say to people when you're trying to get the hang of this, just being aware of the cycle, and where I started with this was I would ask myself how I'm feeling first because it's easier to catch or notice a feeling than a thought sometimes because the feeling, can feel quite powerful if it's, frustration or um, anger, for example. You can notice the feeling first. So if you notice the feeling, then you can say to yourself, what thought is connected to this feeling and write out the thoughts in reverse. Then your kind of job from there is to challenge those thoughts. Are they true? Can I work on changing this narrative a little bit? So think about it like you're going to take a photograph of what's going on by writing this out. Then your job is to challenge it. So hopefully that helps. So I want to give you another tool here, thinking about our thoughts and how we think about ourselves, which is the circle of control. So this is one of my favorites, and the idea for this actually came from Stoicism originally, particularly the work of, I think it was Epictetus, the Greek philosopher. So he basically taught that some things are within our control, like our thoughts, our actions, our choices, but other things are not, like other people live in that bracket, outcomes or, external events. So modern psychology and, therapists and whatever have built on this idea. So it's quite widely used now as a practical tool to improve your focus, to help you with your train of thought. So the dartboard here, I added in as a personal thing because this works quite well for me as a visual aid. So for anyone who's quite visual, I'll give you an example of what I do. So I ask myself, can I control it? Can I influence it? Can I not control it? So, a thought might pop in. You put it in one of those three areas. So what I tend to do is I imagine the little bullseye in the middle as the what I can control. The second circle is the what I can influence and the what can I not control. So mentally for me, I kind of throw the dart into the circle in my mind of I can control that, so I'm throwing that away. So it's just a little visual thing. Now, this could just as easily be, a filing cabinet or, bins or something. If you're not particularly visual, if auditory is more dominant for you and sound works better, you could use like a swish or some kind of noise. or you could just write it out as well. But I want you to think about every thought that pops in. If you were to try and organize it in this way, could you write it out and then focus on what you can't control? So think about it like organizing first, zoom in and control second. I can't control, what something random. Petrol prices right now, right? I'm going to throw that dirt away. I'm going to come back. And what can I control? Myself and my thoughts and actions and outcomes. Really, that's it. Everything else is in one of those other circles. So hopefully that little visual kind of helps. But in the context of, this idea of you're trying to build something, we're trying to grow something important to us, you have to remember that you can only control yourself and your actions. Other people's ideas, thoughts, perceptions of what you're doing, you cannot control. Can you throw that away so that you can focus on what you're actually doing? So, again, something now that I can reflect on with the gift of time is when I first started. I used to really worry that the people that I used to work with would, and I had a little visual again, I had a little image that was not helpful at all of them all huddled around a computer looking at my website, laughing at it, which seems quite terrible now. Just because I thought, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I imagined the worst thing that could happen is people laughing at what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to set up. That feels very removed now. But at the time, that was really debilitating. It took me a while to work through that until, now I'd be like, well, I can control that. The dart is gone. What can I control? My offer that I'm putting out there, that's the most important thing. I'm going to focus on that. Hopefully that helps a little bit. Now, I also want you to think about the impact of this emotional response because I want to really zoom in on emotion a little bit. Now, a little bit of background on emotion in general. So it comes from the Latin word moviere, which means to move. So I want you to think about now emotion as literally energy in motion. So the next time you feel a wave of emotion, whether that's, sadness, frustration, anger, think of it in this way. It's literally energy moving. So this really helps, I think, because it changes your perception of what that means. So what you could say to yourself is something like, how can I channel this emotion? How can I use this to move in an intentional direction? Now, someone said scared, and let's say, that emotion is scared. If you were to say, okay, I'm scared, that's absolutely fair. How can I channel it? How can I use this to move in an intentional direction? Because if you're scared, then something is important to you. If you're scared, then there's energy behind that. If you're scared, what if the scared became the fuel and you totally flip it? So, because it's fair to say, obstacles are likely to make us emotional. If you're scared, that's going to be quite a heavy feeling. So, you have to be able to keep yourself really steady. Now, the Greeks actually had a word for this and they called apatheia, which was a kind of state of, calm or balanced. Now, this isn't easy. I think it's important to say that. Again, it's a skill that has to be cultivated over time. But I want you to really consider focusing your energy and emotional response on solving the problem rather than reacting to it, which again, if we go back to the the cognitive model, if you can see your emotion written down really clearly, then you can say, how can I use this to change the behavior? So that feeling of being scared, for example, if I use that emotion to change the behavior, then that's how you can switch it. Because if you're scared and you take no action, the behavior is avoidance. If you're scared and you take the action, then you're using it as fuel for something really powerful. So I want you to really know and understand that there's a lot of energy within emotion that you can harness. So there's so much research happening on emotion right now. I feel like we're kind of in the middle of an emotional revolution scientifically. It's fair to say, I think we're still figuring out how it all works neurologically, biology. But I think what we can say from what I've read is that we can actively use emotions to act as an internal kind of guidance system. So if your emotions are pointing you in the right direction, we might not scientifically understand how this all works, in your brain yet, but we do know that emotion is literally integrated into the circuits of your brain. It's inseparable in a way from the rational thought. It's kind of like, when they were doing research on this early 1900s, they kind of thought that, anger lived in one part, excitement lived in another part, and it was all very black and white. Now, basically, your whole brain lights up, so it's the connections between these circuits that are inseparable, and that's, what everybody is trying to figure out. But the important thing to know here that is emotion can be really useful if you reframe it and if you integrate it in a way that you can use being scared as a positive, for example. So I've put here an example of anxiety. So anxiety allows for the resolution of conflict before it threatens your survival. So this is where it comes from psychologically. So think about anxiety as it's the want or the need to maintain order or control or certainty amongst, a group of this was from the book Emotional, um, which tells you about where anxiety comes from a evolutionary perspective. So anxiety from an evolutionary perspective is really helpful because if there's order in the group, then the group will survive. So you're kind of again pre-programmed to look for things that might threaten this group instinct and for you to stay part of that group. So when you're thinking about emotion, try to think about it like a signpost. What is this emotion trying to tell me? So let's use that example of being scared. That emotion is trying to tell me that this is really important to me and I'm afraid to mess it up. So if I can use that emotion to drive myself forward behavior wise, then what's that one thing that I can do? What's that one step that I can take? And it could be I'm going to get some help with my website. I don't feel confident in my ability to do that part, but I'm confident enough to bring someone in who can. So, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Now, the outcome of this, let's think about, how does this relate to where you are right now? What's the outcome of knowing your thought patterns, your emotional patterns a little bit better? And I feel like it gives you an element of control. You know what's going on, therefore, you have more choice. So I've put metacognition in here, thinking about your thinking, which is what that is. And I want you to really start to be really kind of diligent with yourself in, is this helping me or not? When you're thinking about your thinking, is this helping me or not? Or myself, 5 or 6 years ago now, is the thought of, all of those people huddled around a screen laughing at my website helping me? Absolutely not. Therefore, the dart gets thrown outside. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing. I'm back. I'm balanced. There's something I've also called it emotional consideration here. So allowing yourself space to think about your emotional response and your typical emotional response and how can you use it maybe in a different way. So I feel like it gives you a sense of, personal kind of mastery. Like you've got a sense of, I know what's going on. I've got a little bit on resilience here. So where you know your patterns, you grow a sense of psychological resilience that I can handle this when something bad happens or something unexpected happens. You know how you will respond. You can map it out. You can take your notes on the cognitive model and you can use that knowledge for next time. So you're still moving forward, even though you're dealing with something that's happening right now because you're making progress. Hopefully, this makes sense. I also wanted to reframe the idea of an obstacle for you using principles from the book The Obstacle is the Way, which is by Ryan Holiday. I've added that onto the reading list and you'll get the updated one of that too in the email. Um, but I want you to consider a core principle again. So we don't control events that happen. We control our perception, our action, and our will. Now, this is what he talks about and partly in the book. So I've put it here. PAW, perception, action, and will. So this is how we see things, what we do, and the desire and the feeling of the strength to do it. So think about it like the obstacle can become the pathway when you work with it, but you have to lean into it a little bit. So I want you maybe to think about here, what feels like your biggest barrier right now? Is it an external thing like a website, or is it internal? Is it a feeling or self-sabotage or, something like this? Because I feel like for most women, certainly starting out, trying to set something up, the loudest obstacles, the biggest ones can sometimes be the internal ones. So I want you to see them clearly. I want you to hear them. I want you to actively challenge them, right here, right now in this space. This is what we're here for. Is it true? Is it real? Is there anything you can leave here in this session with us and move forward without it? Maybe that's something nice. If you want to leave something here, put it in the chat. What do you want to leave here and, not take with you when you move on? Now, I want to look at a common obstacle that, I hear quite often. Someone mentioned it in the chat, I believe, earlier. So this is imposter syndrome. I want to look at this briefly through a kind of neuroscience lens because I think this might be helpful for you. The first thing is this is not a weakness. So I want to explain why this happens. So the first thing is your brain predicts social rejection as a threatening situation. So you don't want to be rejected biologically, psychologically. Second thing is visibility triggers uncertainty in the mind and body. And this uncertainty can activate your kind of internal threat system, your fight or flight system, because we don't know how people will react when we put that out there, whatever that may be, an idea or, a website or a social media post or whatever it is. So your nervous system is reading this as new. It's a new situation. It might be unsafe. And so it's holding you back. This is very normal. So this is, the product of a couple of hundred thousand years of evolution. And this is a safety mechanism that we all have. So it's normal for you not to want to put yourself out there. But I want to invite you to reframe imposter syndrome as a normal response to growth. So the next time somebody said they were feeling it, I want you to really think about it like, oh, this is a normal response to growth. I'm okay with this. What's next? So you can ask yourself here, I've got a couple of questions that you can consider. When do imposter syndrome feelings spike the most? When do they spike the most? And what are you doing in those moments? It's about kind of illuminating those and bringing them to life. Now, something that Ryan Holiday said in the book, which I really loved, was discomfort becomes your training ground. So when you're uncomfortable, you kind of celebrate it a little bit. That might feel like a little bit too much right now for some of you, but I promise it can feel like that. No, it's normal. Take one step forward anyway and work with that discomfort like it's energy, like it's something that's normal, that's natural. Bring it into the light. Don't be afraid to write about it. Otherwise, it's holding you back anyway. Something else I wanted to kind of spotlight was the fear of visibility and judgment, because I know this can be a really huge one when you're starting, to grow a business. So let's think about this again together, try to reframe it a little bit. So I want you to think about, what are you afraid people will think? What are you afraid people will think? So I can only go on my personal experience here. And again, if I had asked myself that back then, it would have been, I would have afraid they think, who is she to be doing this? She doesn't know what she's talking about. How can you move industry? I came from like a clothing import export background. So I guess I was worried about what people would think of that transition. And then think about who specifically are you afraid of will think X, Y, and Z? This really helps to kind of, let's shine a light on this together. Who specifically? It might be one person. It might be a little group, maybe a family member, maybe someone actually really close to you. And then lastly, what's the worst case scenario, story, narrative that you're telling yourself about this? What's worst case scenario? Now, again, when you're, trying to figure this out and how this impacts you, this idea of coming back and challenging it is really important. So you have, um, what's the best way to describe it? You've got a lot of cognitive patterns that you personally are probably not familiar with. So one of them is called mind reading, and we all do it to some extent, but some people are more prone to it than others, where you're continually trying to mind read what's going on. So is it something specifically that someone has said, or are you projecting what you think they think? So are you mind reading? It sounds really obvious, but a lot of the time we're like, well, they've never actually said that, so I think what they think is. And then can this just be a projection of fear? Now, I want you to really think about, what you're trying to build is a service or a product. This is not self-promotion. This is your service or product or whatever that is that you're trying to build. So, can you separate it from yourself a little bit? This is not you talking about you necessarily most of the time. This is you talking about something that you're promoting or something that you believe in, something that is giving service to others. So, if you keep that inside and you don't take any action, how does that feel? And what is that feeling trying to tell you? So, if your work or service or product, can help one person or a few people, is that silence safer or is it worth it? Because again, you have to kind of be okay with the fear of visibility or judgment, knowing that that's normal. We all feel like that in some respect, but is that worth holding yourself back for? I don't think so personally. And the last one I wanted to really spotlight before we talk about regulation is perfectionism, because this comes up quite a lot. So again, perfectionism is a kind of protective delay mechanism. It's also a classic kind of way to avoid exposure. And amongst other things, it can also be a strong form of self-sabotage and a product of, being very critical of yourself and putting a lot of pressure on yourself. So I want you to think about, what would imperfect action look like? Because you are unlikely to build the perfect website, for example, right away. What would imperfect action look like? So it doesn't have to be perfect. Let's say 70%. What would 70% look like right now? Because a lot of the time we're holding ourselves to such high standards. What if 100% never comes actually? Because will anything ever be perfect? Probably not. Probably not. So I want you to really think about the pressure that you're putting on yourself for everything to be in a certain way or in a particular timeline. Because if you can get it to 70%, that's momentum and that's motion and something's happening. Momentum builds evidence, evidence builds your confidence. And eventually, like we spoke about way at the beginning, this idea of a personal form of mastery kind of sets in. And it's probably something that you maybe notice over time. You're like, oh, yeah, I don't worry so much the way I used to about doing X, Y, Z. It builds a sense of confidence, like you're putting, brick on top of brick, one thing, then another, and you're kind of building this sense from the inside out, one small step at a time. So something else I wanted to talk about, moving on to regulation, is that What I think is really important to remember is that when your threat response system is high, like in any of those examples, your cognition narrows. So again, this is biology. This is literally harder to take the action that you want or need to because your system is in a state of fight or flight. So think about regulation as the way to keep you balanced and restore your sense of personal perspective. So this is really an art form to keep yourself balanced and steady, no matter what is going on. So I've got a few examples for you here. So the first one is name the story. So put it on paper. What is it that's going on? For example, I'm avoiding this action. I'm afraid of X, Y, and Z. Write it down and get really clear with it. The second one is a stress body reappraisal, which is basically, when you feel your stomach flip over or something happens, or you have sweaty palms, or you feel your body reacting, maybe you get tense, something's happening. You have to learn to tell yourself, my body is activating. How can I use this energy? And that's really important because sometimes if you don't become aware of that, your body will just kind of run away with you because it thinks it's doing the right thing to keep you safe and keep you back from the threat. So I've put use your body here because in moments like that, what can I do in this circumstance? Sometimes if you were in, let's say a meeting with someone, let's say you're pitching your idea to someone, or you're even just talking to a friend about it, what can I do in that circumstance? Sometimes physically, not a lot, but you always have the power of your breath. So, for example, there's lots of different types of breath work, but there's a balancing breath and a relaxing breath. So, if you think about a balancing breath work, some of you will have probably heard of box breathing. So you could be in a meeting with someone, which I've done many times, and I'm, breathing in and out. A count of four is normally a good starting point. It might be, personal to you. It might be a count of two or three or five, but basically keep your inhale and exhale the same. Aim for about four. Now you can inhale and exhale just four and four. Keep it really, really simple. Or you can inhale for four, pause your breath for four, exhale for four, pause your breath for four, like a box. So sometimes, people will trace it on their finger or on their palm. Sometimes I like to, visualize it, whatever way works for you. If you're sitting, you could, draw out just a little box. But the whole point behind this idea is how can I use my body to regulate myself so that I can keep my train of thought balanced? Hopefully that makes sense. So, and the last idea I wanted to give you here was the smallest step. So, literally, what is the smallest action I can take? Which could be, okay, I'm going to contact three people and get a cost for them to do my website. Smallest action, no commitment. I just want to get an idea of what I can do next. Because I want you to really think about it like you're not going to rewire your brain and how you think through force, pressure, beating yourself up, or any kind of critical thinking. You rewire yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, your whole system essentially through regulation, but also repetition. Your brain is a creature of habit and it likes repetition. So you have to repeat the empowering thoughts, for example, versus the negative ones. And it doesn't mean that you dismiss the negative ones like they're not there. You see them, you take acknowledgement of them, and then you throw them. You don't need them. So I want you to think about this as a skill that you can build. Now, small adjustments I've put here are really powerful long term. So if you just start with one of these for now and know that, okay, I'm going to start trying to train myself to become more regulated so that I can take action. Now, this is where I wanted to give you an idea that you can build yourself a personal strategy. So, getting to know yourself basically. If you think about perception, which is the first one here, so I've got some ideas for you. Perception, get to know yourself. So, your ways of thinking, your emotional profile, your patterns, your responses, and work on fine-tuning them over time. Now, remember, it's really important that you have complete control here. No one else can change your perception unless you let them. So through your perception, you can build things up, you can create them, but you can also destroy your obstacles. Now, action. Make it really normal for you to take small steps, even when it's painful, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're way out of the comfort zone. The action is important so that you're building block on top of block. Now, your will is your personal connection to a desire or a strength to achieve what you actually want to. So when things are changing around you and we can control the things around us, this is what you hold on to. It's this desire to do what you're wanting to do. And that's really, really important. No one can take that away. Now, regulation, building this idea of a toolkit of methods that will help you stay regulated, stay balanced. Now, the best way to do this is a mix of cognitive tools, how you're thinking, but also physical tools. So, I want to give you a little suggestion here on this because, sometimes this might feel like, my God, I have so much to work on. But if you're in a dysregulated state, a good little trick is body first, mind second. The fastest way to regulate your system is to do something with your body. Now, breathing is a really powerful one. So you could use your box breath, for example. If you're on your own and you are procrastinating, using your body might be to put on a really brilliant 80s tune and dance around the kitchen and shake everything out because this is energy releasing. Sitting at your desk, really beating yourself up and being hard on yourself is not the way to regulate your system. So really think about, I need to use body first, mind second. And let's say you go to the kitchen, you dance it out to a good ABBA tune or something like that. Then you come back to your desk and you work on the cognitive model and you say, okay, I'm going to see exactly what's going on here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. Absolutely perfect. It doesn't mean that the next day that might not happen again, but it might be less. And remember that repetition, you have to keep doing it in order to make a difference because you're training your brain essentially. Now, I added this in about 10 minutes before we came on the call this morning because I got an email that was talking about building bridges, which I thought was really suitable for what we're talking about. So, building bridges, if something isn't going well, ask yourself how you can build a little bridge to it. So, this was from, if you want to check out this email, so it's from Holly Garber, which some of you may know. So, it was a newsletter that she actually just sent this morning. So, what she says is, if you're trying to do something, you can't get there, think about, right, how can I build a bridge? So, she had a couple of examples. One of them was like getting a part-time or a casual job for income while you're building your early stage business or before you start. Because what you want is to be at full capacity for your business, but it might not be possible. So build yourself a little bridge. Or it could be taking a sideways move or taking a more junior role, something to help you launch that career transition to your own business because what you want is to keep your seniority because, that's normal for all of us while switching roles, but sometimes it's not possible. She had another example of, hire a contractor to help you expand your capacity if you want to have a full-time person, but you can't afford it just yet. What she said is there's usually a little bit of resistance to bridges, which makes sense because we want the path to be straight. We don't want to have to take these little bridges, but sometimes it's okay to be the person who has to cobble a new pathway together. So I think that's really relevant, and I think that kind of helps to think, it doesn't have to be exactly the way I thought it was going to be. My will is strong enough to make this happen. So just very quickly, I wanted to finish with this lovely idea, again, taken from Ryan Holiday's book. So let me read it out for you. It says, the struggle against an obstacle inevitably propels the fighter to a new level of functioning. The extent of the struggle determines the extent of the growth. The obstacle is an advantage, not adversity. So isn't that really lovely to think about? The obstacle is an advantage, not adversity. So I want you to think about, your most recent or your current obstacle. What if this isn't actually blocking you? What if this is building you long term? So if you can keep this kind of in mind, as obstacles will come your way, which they will, then maybe you can see them a little bit differently. Maybe you can react a little bit differently. ultimately meaning your outcome may be different. So, thank you so much. Of course, we want you to connect with your amazing Business Gateway team because all of you are going to need very specific support. And, these um, team of professionals are really there to guide you for that next step, whatever personal step that is for you. So if you want to reach out, please contact your local office